All right, we're ready to take off, ready to launch our Passover GEMS class, the first of two sessions, in which we will be looking at really laser focus on one part of the Seder, and this is the way, you know, my preference in terms of preparing for the Seders are really to look at one limited section instead of looking at the whole Haggadah and taking something from here, the beginning, the end, really to focus on one section and showing a preference for new Haggadot that have been published this year. So I have two new ones to share with you today. Maybe some more next week. I acquired 5 new Haggadot this year. One of which is the Haggadah of the Chatam Sofer. So for those participants in our Parsha class, we're not leaving our two favorite commentators this year behind, the Rav Hirsch and the Chatam Sofer. They will be joining us today in their interpretations on the Haggadah, but as well as some others. So just going to make sure I have the right files opened, and we will jump right in. Okay, so we're going into the 4 children, really looking at the first and the second one today. And we'll see whether we'll do the third and fourth next time. Interesting that I find the third and the fourth the most compelling because they're the most mysterious. We don't really know much about the simple child and the child who doesn't know how to ask. We really know nothing about, and that's what makes it really interesting for interpretation as to which child, which child one identifies with, and you know, if one is a parent, which child one sees in one's own children. Just to take a step back for a moment, I'll stop sharing for a moment. Just to take a step back, the Haggadah says Baruch Hamako, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenatan Torah Li'amo Yisrael, Baruch Hu. Right, that's the phrase Baruch Hamako, and note that it says the word Baruch 4 times. And that's the introduction to the 4 sons. Baruch Hamako, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenatan Torah, Israel, Baruch Hu. So 4 Baruchs lead us to the four children. The order of the 4 children and the answers that we give to the 4 children are actually mentioned in the Torah, but the order in which they're presented in the Haggadah is not the order of the Torah. They're actually a little bit out of order, and the answer that one gives to the wicked child, for example, is different. Is in a different context in the Torah, but as some of the commentators point out, that we're presented to the children in order of the value of, well, can anyone venture a guess? And there are multiple approaches to this. What's the order? Wise, wicked, simple, does not know how to ask. How would you describe that order, that progression? There are about 500 correct answers to this question.
From the positive to the negative.
Okay, great. So
order of age.
One approach is positive to negative.
Order of age.
Order of age. Okay, Arthur, order of age. Excellent. But let's go back to Oro's comment, because positive to negative is a beautiful way of looking at the wicked child, because you have now put the rebellious child towards the beginning, which sometimes is true in terms of positive and in terms of contribution to a conversation, to a family conversation. But and there are commentators who do say that they're in order, they're in some type of preferential order from best to, as it were, worst. But okay, good. In order of age, assuming that the wise one is the eldest. Okay. Yeah, and you could see that as developmental steps in a child's life, that they start off as not knowing how to answer questions, then they go to being simple, then they have a little bit of rebellion, and then they become wise. So it could be that that's the progression in the life of a child. Excellent. Anything else? Wise, wicked, simple, not knowing how to ask. So one, and if you have any other answers, please feel free to share. But one classic approach is that we're dealing with the value of wisdom, and we're going from wisest to least wise, because the chacham, the wise child, is the most wise, the wisest. The wicked child has wisdom, smart kid, but unfortunately doesn't apply himself or herself, or doesn't, or applies it in the wrong way. Then you have the simple child who's a little bit lower down on the wise, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, or as someone said, not the sharpest spoon in the drawer. And then you have the she'eno yodea lishol, the child who really has really no concept, doesn't even know the questions to ask. And that's so diminishing in the wisdom. So let's take a look. Before we go, I just have David Sakachevsky. Where are you today? This is the weekly adventure as finding where in the world is David Sakachevsky. And today, David is in Costco. Are you in Costco? Okay, fantastic. Is it okay privately in the chat if I let you know what I need from, you can bring it back for me? Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let's go back. I
already got Abby's order. Don't worry about it.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's go back to the sources. Here we go. Chacham mahu omer. What does the wise child say? Ma ha'edot v'chukim v'mishpatim asher tziva Adonai Eloheinu etchem v'afa ta'amor lo ki hilchot Pesach ein maftir na Pesach afikomen. So this child asked an appropriate question, right? This is what we want from our children, on topic, appropriate, curious, a little bit of halachic nuance, wants to know about the edot v'hachukim, about the testimonies and the statutes and the laws. And by the way, by mentioning all three of those categories, he already knows a lot, because who knows, we have this general category of mitzvah, but within that category of mitzvah, there are lots of different types of commandments and ways that God has given us those commandments. And this child knows all of those ways. This child knows so much, and great. And any blatant questions about the chacham that one would want to ask right now? Any difficulties?
Why doesn't he say, as commanded us?
Amazing question. Thank you. Because we're looking ahead to the Rasha, right? To the wicked child. And the wicked child, remember, he says, God, what is this worship or the service that God commanded you? And the Chacham uses the same language. God has commanded you. So I saw a commentary about, 30 seconds before I logged into this Zoom meeting. I saw a commentary in this Haggadah right here, which is called the Haggadah Shlema, which deals with multiple midrashim and commentaries and brings together lots of different commentaries. And there are actually some words underlined in here in pencil. So whenever I have a book, this is my book, and I look who underlined words, it actually has Abby's name in the front. So this is a book that Abby brought into the relationship. And so it says here, why does the Chacham say that the commandments that God commanded you? Because he is so wise, because he knows he's just a child. And children are not obligated in the Korban Pesach, and the Paschal sacrifice. And therefore, he says you to exclude himself out of a deep knowledge of Jewish law. That's why the Chacham excludes himself. I'll get there. I'll be there when I grow up, after my bar mitzvah, after my bas mitzvah. I'll be there with you. But as for now, it's your commandment, says this super wise child. But great question. And actually, I'm so glad that you asked that, because that question had always, of course, it has bothered me for quite a while, and I'd never seen a satisfying answer until just a short while before this meeting. He's asking from the perspective of a child. Chacham mahu omer. So we're going to take a look at the first Haggadah we're going to look at. Has a very, very creative reading of.
Why do you assume that the Chacham is a child? I mean, where does that come from? I never thought of the Chacham as being a child.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the language of Keneged Arba'a Banim Dibra Torah, that corresponding to 4 children. It's a fairly, and even in the Torah, Ki yishalcha bincha machar, when your child asks you tomorrow, it's the language is a child. Yeah. So the next Haggadah offers a very creative read of this first phrase, Chacham mahu omer, because they parse it differently, and I'll show you how. Chacham, wise person, Ma, what? Who, he? Omer, say. What does he say? Chacham kama, usually we read it Chacham kama, mahu omer. So look at how we can say it differently. And this Haggadah is from Rav Pesach Kron. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Rav Pesach Kron. He is well known for his Magid series, which is a series on all of Jewish law. I don't know how many books he's published, but probably many dozens of books with the best stories and amazing stories. And he has Torah tapes in my yeshiva. When I was in yeshiva in Israel in the mid-90s, we had a Torah tape library. And you would go and take cassettes out of the library and listen to them. And I would listen to Rabbi Pesach Kron's tapes because he really was amazing, a very well-known Moel also in the New York City area. So he says, Chacham mahu omer. There are those who homiletically read these words. How to Chacham mahu? What is a wise person? Omer, somebody who is careful with what they say. Right? It's a very creative way of parsing. Chacham mahu, what is the wise person? Omer, somebody who is very careful with how they speak. And then he gives a story because this is the style of this Haggadah. The Magid, the concept of a Magid is one who teaches through stories and through parables. And he gives and he offers a story where I've copied one of them here about Rav David Trenk, a master Rebbe, principal and counselor, was informed on a Friday night that one of his students had just stolen a car and gone to the movies. When Rabbi Trenk verified it, he decided to go to the movie theater, which was more than an hour's walk from his yeshiva. At the theater, he asked the cashier if he could go inside to speak to the student. The student told me that he was watching the movie when suddenly he noticed someone sitting down next to him. Though it was dark, he saw it was his Rebbe. Utterly stunned, he said, Rebbe, what are you doing here? I had to tell you something. But how did you get here? I walked. But it's more than an hour's walk. Yes, I know that. But what I have to tell you is important. And the student told me he was bracing himself for angry diatribe, but the rabbi said, I want to tell you that the popcorn they sell here is treif, so don't buy it, because if someone eats treif food, it could be harmful to the neshama. That's it? To the student at shop. I said, I would say that all the food here is treif, so don't eat any of it. I'll see you back at the yeshiva. And the student took his Rebbe's hand and said, wait, don't go. I'm coming with you. And together they walked more than an hour back to the yeshiva. And the student told me that they conversed. Not once did Rabbi Trenk mention the car or the theater. When they reached the yeshiva, the 16-year-old boy said, I swear I'll never be Machal Shabbos again. And he never was. Today he's an upstanding Jew who helps multitudes, all because of the wisdom of his Rebbe, who got the message across with dignity, validation, wisdom, and respect. I think it's a beautiful story. I don't know what happened with the stolen car. If he left it at the movie theater, I don't know if the person ever got it back. I don't know the end of the story. I have a lot of questions about the story. But either way, the major point here is Chacham Mahu. What is a sign of wisdom? Is one who knows exactly what to say, when to say it, how to say it. And here is a beautiful story of a Rebbe who could have come in and really attacked the kid and really been very harsh towards him, and in the end chose to take a much more gentle approach, which worked. It's an excellent Haggadah, and there's really incredible material in there at the Magid Seder, and that's one of my new Haggadot this year. I have it right here, and I just wanted to check if it was published this year or last. It's new to me. And it is copyright, first impression, February 2020. Fourth impression, February 2021. So it's relatively new. Brand new last year, still new this year. Okay, so that's his insight into the Chacham, and we're going to focus now on the Rasha. So the Rasha says, the Rasha, Mahu Omer. What does the Rasha, what does the wicked person say? Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. Lachem, what does this service mean to you? Lachem v'lo lo, to you, not to him. And because he excludes himself from community, rejects a major principle of faith, hakeh et shinav. You should, it's a difficult phrase to translate, but blunt his teeth. You should, I don't know how one does that without knocking them out, but you should blunt his teeth and say to him, Ba'avur zeh asa Adonai li b'tzeiti miMitzrayim, and you should say to him, God did this for me, v'lo lo, not for him, v'ilu hayasham lo haya nigal. If he were there, he would not have been redeemed. Okay, so that's the wicked child. What's wrong with the wicked child? Like, what's the real issue? So we're going to look now, and this will be really our activity for today. We're going to look at a few different comments as to what's wrong with the Rasha. What's wrong with the wicked child? Other than the fact that he is wicked, we're calling him wicked. But what's the actual fault? What's actually the problem with him? So our jumping off point is this, again, new to me. I have it right here, touched by a story, another similar concept of a Haggadah. This is from February 2015. So I actually, this is not new to me this year. I've had this on my shelf, but I don't know that I've ever used it before. And it's a great Haggadah. So our jumping off point for the Rasha is in an interesting place because we're going to go back to karpas. Karpas being the vegetable that is not the maror. And he tells the story of the Psherovska Rebbe, who shared a story about the Kalashitzer Rebbe. And on one Rosh Hashanah, when he was 3 years old, he saw his grandfather, who was the Shinova Rebbe, walk out of his room wearing his kittel and head toward the base medrash to blow the shofar. And he pointed to him and said to his mother, "Look, Mama, the Zaidi is going to eat karpas." Okay, so the insider conversation here is that people wear a kittel at the Pesach Seder. It's a custom to wear the white kittel at the Seder, and it's a custom to wear the white kittel on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as well. That's the kittel also that one wears under the chuppah, and that's a kittel also that one is buried in. It's the same garment that one wears at all of these moments in life. And so the grandson saw his grandfather, the future Rebbe, the Kalashitzer Rebbe, saw his grandfather, Shinova Rebbe, wearing the kittel. He said, that kittel, I know it from the Seder. Look, Mama, the Zayda is going to eat karpas. And on the surface, it seemed nothing more than an innocent mistake and a cute story about a 3-year-old future Rebbe. But when his grandfather heard, he said, actually, we eat karpas and blow the shofar for the same reason. So there's something extraordinarily holy. That's the point of this Hasidic Rebbe, is that there's something extraordinarily holy and sacred about karpas. What is so special about karpas? So here we jump to a Haggadah called Yeseh V'Yifsach from Rav Moshe Wolfson. And this is a Haggadah, as you can see up here on the title page of the Haggadah. It's scanned into this amazing site called HebrewBooks.org, where there are so many works that are there that are firstly out of print, or just that are put out there for public consumption and not to be sold. And this is one of those Sfarim. It's only written in 2008. And here we have it today, 13 years after it was published. It's available to the public as a PDF file that's 25 megabytes large, and you can peruse it, and it's got some really amazing stuff in there. So he writes on the karpas. What's the purpose of karpas? We assume it's vegetation. It means growth. This is the growth of the children of Israel in Egypt. It's the springtime. We're eating vegetables. He says, no, the reason we eat karpas and we dip the karpas in the salt water, Eina ela lahatmiya hatinokot. It's just to astound the children. The karpas is there. You take a little piece of vegetables, you dip it in salt water, you eat it. You say bracha, you eat it. That's to make sure that the children are wondering, why in the world are you doing that? And he gives a few other things that there are ideas on Pesach that we're supposed to give candies to the children, and you're supposed to keep them interested and engaged. And he said, this is the idea that we're supposed to inspire their curiosity. If once they're looking at the karpas at the beginning of the meal and saying, why is he doing that? Then they're going to be attentive to all other things as well. But wait a second, the karpas, unlike manishtana, where we have an answer to the children, we go avadim hayinu after manishtana. When they ask questions, we have answers. Karpas, if it's supposed to inspire curiosity, where are the answers? There are no answers to karpa. Why are you eating that? Why are you dipping that in the water? I don't know. There are no answers. And then he quotes, V'nira leva'er, you can answer that there's a work called Zichron Moshe, which is a work of stories about the Chatam Sofer. And the Chatam Sofer said, Pa'am achat, that one time, Shalu beno, his son asked him, Eze she'ela b'chakira, he asked him a question, an insightful question, V'lo anao, he didn't answer him. V'alach b'pachei nefesh, and the son was very despondent, was very upset that his father didn't answer the question. And a few days passed. Karao, the father called to the son, and he explained in a very clear way an answer to his question. He said, my son, just know that I had the answer, tekef, immediately when he asked the question, but I wanted to make you, to get you used to the idea, that even if a person has a question, that has no answer, if you have a question without an answer that doesn't have a satisfying answer, that shouldn't lead you to fall away from your faith in God. Sometimes we're going to have questions and there are not going to be any satisfying answers, and that's the karpas. It's supposed to inspire curiosity, but it's also supposed to inspire a sense of being satisfied that there is no answer. There's no satisfying answer for this child. Going back to the Haggadah that we saw before. Here we go. Here's the next section of this Haggadah. He says, you know what? The son is a rasha. The karpas is supposed to inspire curiosity. And the rasha is not curious. He is sleeping from the mitzvot. And that's why he says, what's this purpose to you? And here he gives a really creative, a really clever approach. He says, hakeh et shinav, when it says that you should blunt his teeth, we should knock out his shinav, can come from the word shena, his sleep. If you take out the sleep, the slumber, the lack of interest or curiosity from the word rasha, what are you left with? The letters resh and ayin, which means air, which means awake. If you knock out the shena, the shin, you're left with the letters that spell the word awake. That's what the Rambam says in speaking about the shofar, Hilchot Shofar, that ulu yishenim yishenatchem, awaken sleepers from your slumber. That's his approach. So the big picture, stepping back for a second, the Rasha who says, what is this service for you? His issue, you put in the Chacham, he wanted to know. He was curious. He wanted to understand more. The Rasha is asking but doesn't want to understand. The Rasha is there but not interested, not curious, sleeping through life. That's the issue with the Rasha, according to this Haggadah, which was, again, the touched by our story, quoting Rav Moshe Wolfson in his Haggadah Yeseh v'Yifsak. Any questions until now?
In other words, Rabbi, the Rasha is not really interested in the answer. Is that it?
That's it. That's exactly the point. That the Rasha, what is this for you? It's for you. It's not for me. Yeah, I don't need to understand. I don't need a part of this. That's his interpretation.
Because sometimes people who are very skeptical about religious practices or even faith would ask a question, but they don't really expect an answer. It's just sort of to embarrass someone else who is
right,
observant.
They tell classic stories about, somebody comes up to the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, why should I keep Shabbos? And the Rebbe says, well, do you keep Shabbat now? And the guy says, no, I don't keep Shabbat now. And the Rebbe says, so it seems that you have answers. You're asking for answers to your answers. If you kept Shabbos and wanted to know why you should continue, then you have a question. But if you've already answered your question, you don't want to hear my answer. So that's part of the point, is that he's not curious. He is his way. He's removed himself from it. And yes, he's still around the table, and that's great. But part of the critique here is that we believe that this child is just not interested in us and in this part of our life, and therefore that's the issue with him. He doesn't have that curiosity. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Here we go, Rav Hirsch. And I could not find this in English. It's a short passage of Rav Hirsch about what we're doing to the Rasha. We're blunting his teeth. And he says, Rabim sha'alu. Many people have asked the same question. Ma bein shelat haben hachacham l'rasha. What's the difference between the wise child and the wicked child's question, right? They are similar questions. What is this to you? What is this to you? Right? And the difference is, and what he's going to say, the difference is that the wise child invokes God's name. He says, Asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu etchem. What are all these mitzvot that God, Hashem, our Lord, has commanded you? La'achar shemakirhu b'chach. Once he is cognizant, once he recognizes shezer ratzon Hashem, that this is the will of God, v'chayavim l'malo, and you have to fulfill the will of God, yacholhu lachtor l'tamav. He can go and try and examine the reasons as to why this mitzvah is the way it is. Once he accepts the essential premise, aval haben harasha, but the wicked child, shoel hatam kshelatzmo, he asks the reason, but he doesn't have anything to do with God and the nature of commandedness. V'yesh l'hakshot et shinav, and he said, ki gam lu hayta kol mitzvah ta'aluma. If every mitzvah would be a mystery to us, we have no idea why we do this mitzvah or that mitzvah. V'goreret she'elot she'em b'finu ma'ana, and there are questions that we don't have answers to. Lo haya nechlash tokef hamitzvah b'chshu zeh. The nature of the mitzvah, of the commandedness, would not weaken at all. Not even one little bit. Even if we had no reason, even if we couldn't say, oh, I keep kosher because it's healthier, or I shake a lulav because it connects me to the earth and to nature and to God creating nature, or I blow the shofar to wake me up to the idea of repentance. Even if I had none of those logical reasons or interpretations of a mitzvah, I would still be obligated to do them. And that's, Rav Hirsch says, that's what the wise son says when he says, what are these things that God commanded you? Once you acknowledge that God commanded, then that's your foundation. And then you look for the reasons. And if you find a reason, that's good. And if you don't find a reason, that's okay also. Either way, you still have the mitzvah. So that's what he said. That's the difference between the Chacham and the Rasha. They ask the same question, but the Chacham invokes God's name and understands where the mitzvah comes from, and the Rasha does not. That's Rav Hirsch. I think it's a very beautiful approach to the Chacham and the Rasha. It's a nuance in the language, how they articulate, how they phrase it, but in that nuance is everything. In that nuance is the whole insight. Okay? Any questions? I think we have two more approaches to the Chacham. Okay. Rabbi Bulka from Ottawa. He should live and be well. He wrote a Haggadah a number of years ago, and let me see, I have it right here in front of me as well. I have a large pile of Haggadah here. So this is published in 2005. And he says something very beautiful, I think. He says, we tell this delinquent child, he uses very gentle language, delinquent child, not wicked, but delinquent child, that is only because of the dedication and commitment of his ancestors that he can now afford the luxury of protest. He may not realize it, but his very deviance is only possible because of those who preceded him. Had they given up, he would not be here to reject. Had he been in Egypt then and taken the same attitude, he would have remained behind. At the very least, he should be grateful to his ancestors for making it possible for him to now deviate. Right? This is the essential point, that it is a luxury to be in a position to rebel. It is a luxury. It is an absolute luxury to be in a society in which we are free enough to make the wrong choices for a Jew. Right? That's his point, is that this child asking, I don't want anything to do with this. Well, you know why you have that choice and that liberty, and you know why you can be part of a society that's free and that welcomes you, and that is because your ancestors suffered. So at the very least, have hakarat hatov, have a little bit of gratitude for that which happened in the past. That's what I thought was a really beautiful approach to the wicked child. Why are we telling the wicked child about our ancestors? What does that have to do with anything? You blunt his teeth and that's it? No, you blunt his teeth and you say, you might not believe, but those who believed made it possible for you not to believe. Which is, I think, a very brilliant logical step. Any questions, comments? Okay. The Chasam Sofer. Oh, Abby. Abby's raising her hand.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so maybe this is obvious, but I wonder if Hikachinav could be understood as, to blunt the sharpness of his argument, as opposed to the actual, right, kind of, it seems like almost causing damage, some kind of physical harm, right? But I wonder if there's something about lessening, right, the bite that comes from those who criticize. And that sometimes that's our job, but to hear the criticism, but to hope that the criticism doesn't go too far, like when we are our own worst enemies sometimes.
That's very beautiful. That's very beautiful. Yeah, you could certainly say that it's a way of softening him, softening the sharpness of his critique. I like that. I mean, there are thousands of approaches into what this phrase "hake et shinav" means. One other approach, which I may have taught in previous years, is that look at this word, rasha, this word right here. This is the word for a wicked person. So it's made up of the first, resh, shin, aleph. So if you look at the outside letters, they spell the word
Ayin.
ra. Resh ayin spells the word ra, which is evil, right? That's evil. And the middle letter is a shin. And there's one teaching which says, the shin is the three-pronged letter. And three in Judaism, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Every rasha, if you look inside, you're going to find Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In the inner core is something very holy. The outside might be Ra, but the inner core might be holy. Remember, the name of this middle letter is the Shin. So what do you do to him? Hake et Shin Av. Knock out the Shin from within him. Make him find his Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the letter Shin. Knock it out of him. And so he's cognizant of the holiness that exists within him. Right? That's another approach to it. Less pshat, but another approach to it. Okay, so the Chasam Sofer, which this is a new Haggadah this year, which was written by actually a Montrealer, Sruli Besser, and just out from Art Scroll. It's a great Haggadah, and he asks a very simple question. He says, it talks about the wicked son and what's the issue, what's the question understood by the wicked son, and I'm going to skip around a little bit because it's an extensive quote, but basically what the Chasam Sofer says is that you need to have clear goals and objectives in life. And a person cannot wait without limit, without divine purpose or time that they are hoping towards. Telling a servant to work with no real objective or time limit is not fair to them. You need to have goals, you need to know where you're going, but you also need to have patience. Okay, and where does he say that? Let me go on to the next page. He says, this strength to wait patiently, to know that we have goals, but to wait patiently, is reserved for serving God. And it's not proper to subjugate someone else, forcing them to serve a human being with patience, and say, meaning the laws of employing somebody else. You're not allowed to give them a task that has no end. You're not allowed to withhold payment from them if they're due payment. There are responsibilities that we have towards other people because we work towards goals in life. But when it comes to divine service, that asks of us a different type of patience. This trait is so fundamental that this ability to wait with fortitude and tranquility evokes divine favor. And the Midrash says, when the wise man sits and expounds and people listen, Hashem forgives their sins. So remember that line for just a few moments. When the wise man sits and expounds, why does this behavior of just sitting and waiting, why does it deserve such a great reward? And what's meant by the people listen? Who else would the Chacham speak to? So when a wise person speaks, sharing ideas that are beyond the comprehension, and perhaps sometimes it seems too harsh or too complex, but those people, those who don't understand, sit patiently waiting for it to end because they know that he'll return to something inspiring, stories of engagement, and that interests them. And that's what we're able to do when you have a deep commitment to the subject, to the topic, to the idea, you're willing to wait patiently for that to happen. The opposite of this virtue was found when they left when they left Egypt, and the children of Ephraim who couldn't wait for the redemption from Mitzrayim, and the Midrash tells us that they made a mistake in calculation and so on. It's basically showing that there are times where we could critique those who don't have patience. And the Chacham speech that we said before, the word Yoshev, B'shah Chacham Yoshev Doresh, he sits. What is sit? Sit also means to delay. When the Chacham speaks for a long time, people wait, and this evokes divine favor and brings forgiveness. All of this going to say that what the Seder teaches is patience. That we teach children the simanim, the order of the Seder, kadesh or chatz. It's a night of waiting, and when they are familiar with the entire process, knowing they're not going to eat their meal until much later, they're being taught patience. That's a lesson we teach at the Seder, patience. This night equips them with a fundamental Jewish talent, that of waiting patiently, right? It's a balance between being patient and being impatient to get things done. There's always that balance, but patience is always part of the mix. Now we can well understand the question of the wicked son. Why are you doing all of this? Why is all of this service? Like we're here for a meal, aren't we? And why is this taking so long? Why do you invest so much time and effort in telling the story? Why do you concentrate on eating the matzah so much? Just eat. Just go to your meal. Just get the show on, start already. And so we tell him what happened in Mitzrayim, how those who had no patience weren't redeemed. The Bnei Ephraim couldn't hold out. They met a bitter fate. If you had been there, you would have been impatient also, and only those who were patient were redeemed. That's our message to him. So the new Haggadah, the Chatam Sofer, says, what's wrong with the Rasha is that his question is really, why are you doing all this? Let's eat already. And our answer to him is, you need patience in Jewish life. If you're going to be a Jew in the modern era in any time, and you need everything to happen, I need to be redeemed right now, I need for it to happen right now, then that's a problem. That you need that we teach patience in Jewish life. I want to close with this Haggadah, which is a Haggadah Gush Katif, which was a Haggadah that was published after the Jews were expelled from Gush Katif, and there, of course, I imagine Haggadah was one of the first things that they published because of the parallel between leaving Egypt and being forced out of Gush Katif, which was part of Sinai or part of Egypt or connected in some way at some point. But in either way, it's a beautiful Haggadah, and it's really well done. I included the section with the pictures, and every page has these beautiful nostalgic pictures of all they were able to build in Gush Katif. And they say here of Tzvi Schwartz, who was a Rav in Neve Dekalim, which was a moshav in Gush Katif. He wrote, Kol hayudim v'kol hakochot, all Jews, all of the strength that the Jews have, af harishaim, even the evil ones, v'hatmimim, and the simple ones, ve'elu she'einam yodim lishol, and the ones who don't know how to ask, all of them, kriyim banim. All of them are called children. And that's what the Yerushalmi says, the Talmud Yerushalmi, Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah. The Torah speaks about 4 children, Ben Chacham, Ben Tipesh, Ben Tam, Ben Sheni Odesho, Haskula HaYisraeli, the kind of secret power of the Jews, Mitzuya, Gam Eitzel HaToim, is also found by those who have deviated, who have wandered from the path. We have to illuminate this special component that exists in every Jew, no matter where they are vis-a-vis their tradition. We have to do it with love and with faith. And this is the halacha that Rabbi Meir says in Talmud Bavli, even if they're not acting as children, even if they're not behaving like children, kriyim banim, they're called children. V'lo rak banim ela b'nei el chai, not just children, but the children of the living God. Meaning the whole point, or one of the points of the four children, the Chacham, Rasha, and so on, are that they are all children, and they all have a place in the conversation. They all have a place around the table. So it's a very inclusive concept to have these four children here. So we've taken a bit of a journey in these past minutes from the Chacham and the Mahu Omer and the idea of being careful with one's speech, through the Rasha And we spoke about the idea of the Rasha being somebody who is not curious, and the idea of karpas is to inspire curiosity. So that's the problem with the Rasha. We spoke about Rav Hirsch, who said that the problem with the Rasha is that he leaves God out of the story as opposed to the Chacham, who includes God. We quoted Rav Bolka. We studied the Haggadah of Rabbi Bolka from Ottawa, who wrote that the idea that the problem with the Rasha is that he doesn't appreciate the liberties that he has to be a Rasha, and that we need to teach him to be grateful for those who sacrifice before him. And then we looked at the Chasam Sofer, who talks about the attribute of patience. And what the Rasha does not have is patience. And he wants to know why we're doing this. If we don't need to do it, and we need to teach the Rasha patience, because that's a core Jewish value. So that's what I wanted to share with you today in this first Haggadah, gems of the Passover. Next week, I imagine we'll take on the other two children, the Tam and the She'ena Yodei Lishol, with similar insights. Any questions or comments before we?
Yes, Rabbi,
Yes,
what
Laura.
happened to the Ben Ephraim
What happened
in
to
Egypt? The Bnei Ephraim,
Nevei Dekalim? Or
Ephraim, who
what
didn't have
happened? What happened
patience?
to the children of Ephraim? So
What
there are
happened to them?
midrashim that there were those. Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim is problematic at a number of points in the Torah, including right before they settle in the land of Israel. And there are midrashim that say that there are those from Ephraim who didn't go out because they were too anxious for the redemption and didn't have the patience. That's all he's bringing, is that there's a tradition, it's a midrash, that the children of Ephraim were many of them were not redeemed because they couldn't wait for it to happen. All right. Thank you all for being here. Great to see you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. And a reminder, if you want, the links are in the chat for both this source sheet and the Canadian Haggadah. So click on those before we sign out to open in your browsers, or otherwise send an email. We'll be happy to send those to you. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Be well.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Next Thursday, 2 o'clock.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.